this is Cindy Martinez, the host of Welcome to the Neighborhood podcast. Ever since I was young, I've had a passion for true crime and the paranormal. This podcast focuses on cases and stories from different cities while making the Chicagoland, my hometown, our base. If you find yourself intrigued by crime and all things spooky, find us on Apple, Spotify, and Google. We post new episodes every Friday. Be sure to stop by.
Welcome to Ghosts in the Valley. I'm your host, Al Cooley. Today we have Justin Janotwitz. Justin was the director of photography in the Unsolved Mysteries, Berkshires UFO. Justin has a very impressive resume on projects he has worked on over the years, including The German King, A Reckoning, The Wizard, Justice for Vincent, Plastic, plus many, many others. But today we are focusing on Berkshires UFO. Today is part 5 of my 8-part series on the Berkshires. I did want to focus on the cast and the crew from the people who brought this to TV. So here's my conversation with Justin Janowitz, director of photography for the Berkshires UFO. Welcome, Justin, to my show today, and I'm thrilled to have you on.
Thank you, Al. I appreciate you inviting me on.
So before we get started on the Berkshire episode, what led you to this line of work, director of photography and films? And
Oh, wow, that's the hour-long story to try to condense into 30 seconds, I think. I guess the easiest way to sort of say it is I've had a love for film since I was a kid. I grew up in New Hampshire, and there was a little rental store, back when we still had rental stores. I'd go there with my mom, as many times a week as I could get her to take me, and always, trying to find the new movies that were coming out. And my mom was a bit of a cinephile too, and she'd introduce me to films, most kids aren't watching, like Casablanca. Just over the course of my childhood, just sort of fell more and more in love with cinema and filmmaking until I was accepted to Ithaca College. So I graduated from Ithaca College with a degree in cinema and photography. And then from there, I moved to LA, and I've been here for 17 years or so, working in the film business. Not always as a cinematographer, but, varying, very different jobs inside of the field.
so what would you say, is there a difference between a director of photography and cinematography?
I think, different people have different responses. They're pretty universally interchangeable. From everything that I've heard and everything that people have told me. And sometimes people separate it a little bit where, a director of photography is someone that oversees multiple cameras or doesn't actually operate the camera themselves, whereas a cinematographer might be a one-camera shoot that they operate. But at the same time, Roger Deakins operates his own camera a lot of the time, and he's the director of photography. So, I think it's pretty interchangeable terminology.
I was looking back on some of your history, and I really enjoyed your answer on what your core was on filmmaking. Just simplicity is usually the best.
I've always sort of believed that filmmaking is about storytelling. That's why I got into it. I love storytelling, and I think especially when it comes to the filming or the cinematography of whatever the project is, whether it's a documentary or a narrative or even a music video. My goal is always to help tell the story as best as I possibly can, and to help the director tell the story that they're trying to tell. And as soon as you get too many things in the way, too many toys that aren't necessary, too many lights, too many anything that distracts from the core of our job, which I do believe is storytelling, that it slows things down and things get in the way, and it becomes less about the story and more about, just putting fancy things up on the screen. So I've always kind of gravitated towards that philosophy of, simplest is usually best. A lot of the people that I sort of look up to as cinematographers, guys like Deakins and Conrad Hall, they really sort of took the naturalistic approach a lot of the time to what they were shooting. And that's kind of how I've gravitated towards filming and what I like to do as part of the craft.
And I see the second part of that core filmmaking was the story always comes first, So, that would overtake the story with too much toys, too much special effects, maybe, as so to say.
Yeah, it's funny, and maybe I'll get in trouble for saying this, but there's a film that I watched years ago. It's called There Be Dragons. Great film about the Spanish Revolution. It's beautiful. It is stunningly beautiful, and the things that they do with the camera and the lighting in that film are breathtaking. But the problem is, about halfway through, I started noticing that was distracting me from the story, and that's sort of when I really sort of came to that philosophy of, if anything is taking away from the story, then you need to get rid of it, because this is a storytelling medium, and when you distract from that or you take away from that, you're not doing justice to the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, and the third part of that core filmmaking was that the filmmaking is a team sport. So I did notice that the 3 episodes I watched on Unsolved with you and Marcus Clark, the director, do you guys work as a team, or does he call you in for something? I mean, how does that work?
I've known Marcus for about a decade. We've been working together for a long time. We've been friends for a long time. So we're not a team that is hired together. Marcus will be hired on a project as a director, and then if he feels that I'd be the best fit for the project for him as a cinematographer of that film or that project, then he calls me and he brings me in to shoot for him. I've been fortunate. I love working with Marcus. I think he's a brilliant director, and he's a great collaborator. He really knows what he wants, but he's also open to hearing the thoughts of the people that he trusts, that he surrounds himself with. So, while we're not a quote unquote team or a package, we do work together a lot, and we have a lot of teammates sort of philosophy on a lot of stuff.
And how did you get the gig for Unsolved Mysteries?
It was Marcus. Marcus was hired to direct episodes of the show. From what I know, he told the production company that he wanted me to be his director of photography for his episodes, and they vetted me and they approved me, and then we were off to the races.
That's one thing after talking to Tom Reed, Tom Warner and Melanie, that they all said the same thing. They thought he was so professional, and actually the whole team, they said the whole team was so professional, and they loved their experience working with you guys.
Oh, that's really nice of them to say that. Thank you.
So, after working with all 3, was any one of them stand out more than another that you enjoyed working on? Or
I don't think that any one stood out more than the other. I think that, one thing that I find so interesting about this episode, and just this whole, UFO event, that was September 1st, 1969, is that, everyone from Jane Green to Tom Warner, Tom Reed, Melanie Kirchdorfer, they all have their unique story of what happened to them. But there's so many similarities between their stories that's what I sort of found the most interesting, I think, about just the overall project. Listening to how each of their individual stories really kind of stood out from the other ones, but also there was this air of similarity between them. So, hearing Tom Reed talk about being in the car with his family, and then hearing Tom Warner talk about how the beam of light came on him and he was running in place. And I think they're all incredibly memorable stories, but, I don't think that one necessarily stood out above and beyond the other ones.
Are you surprised on how this thing really took off? I mean, the Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix. I mean, it was the number 1 watched miniseries this past summer.
Yes and no. I mean, I grew up watching Unsolved Mysteries, the original series, sort of the 80s and the 90s, and I was a huge fan of it. And it's been this sort of iconic property, almost since its inception. One of the first programs out there to really show mysteries that were unsolved. A lot of the times, I think before that, there was an idea amongst TV makers that, you have to have an end to the story in order for people to be interested in watching what you're watching. And Unsolved came out and put out all these episodes and all these stories of things that had not yet been solved. And then, of course, asked the audience to help out. And over the years, there have been many, many cases that have been solved because of it being on the show, being featured, and then, the audience tuning in. So when the reboot came along, already I was a fan of the property and I knew how iconic the show was. And, just sort of, you see these internet stories about the show's coming back, and the massive amount of people that were just so excited about it. That sort of gave me an inkling that the show was going to be really successful. And then having gone through it and know what we shot and, knowing the people behind it that were going to put it together really well, I was hoping that it would be a nice, big, huge hit, but I don't think that I expected it to be as massively successful as it was.
You did work on 3 of them. I think it was Mystery on the Rooftop, No Ride Home, and the Berkshires UFO. Besides Berkshires, I enjoyed all of them, really, all 6. I really enjoyed the No Ride Home. It just, hasn't been solved. And I think that's my next question is, wouldn't it be great that what you're part of can actually solve one of these stories? That
would be the best thing that could possibly happen. There's really not, I don't think, a whole lot to solve for the Berkshires UFO episode. Unless, the aliens are going to show up and say, yeah, we were there September 1st. There's not much to do with that one, but both the Mystery on the Rooftop and the No Ride Home, the tragedies that befell these families. And, you hear about these things, and just as a normal person, you say, well, I really hope that they can bring justice or they can find out what happened to that. But then you sit down with them and you meet the family and sort of develop that personal connection over the days that you're with them. It really, it would make me incredibly happy if they could get to the bottom of what happened, especially the No Ride Home episode with Alonzo Brooks, his family. They deserve answers. Whoever did this, it really does need to be brought to justice.
We'll be right back with my conversation with Justin Janotwitz after these messages.
This is Weird on the Rocks, a podcast that explores the weird, unusual, strange, and unexplained, all while getting our drink on. Join me every other Monday as I share a different cocktail and discuss true crime, paranormal stories, unexplained phenomena, conspiracy theories, and much more. Find Weird on the Rocks on social media, the website weirdontherocks.weebly.com, and listen on all of your favorite podcast apps. And don't forget to cheers and stay weird.
When I was talking to Doug Sackman, who was the art director, he was telling me that there was a plan of actually putting a craft together where like they were inside the craft, and they nixed that idea early on.
Oh, I don't know about that. They might have discussed that and then decided to.
You don't have any say over what's put in the final episode?
No, my job, my job is to shoot the episode and, handle the lighting, the cameras, and run that entire department. So, what we do shoot is based on, what the director wants, what the production company wants, what everyone thinks the story should be. And then, as with everything that's shot, there are some things that end up on the cutting room floor. And, I don't know who exactly it is that makes those final decisions, but I'm pretty out of the picture by the time that those decisions are made.
On the next 6 coming up on Unsolved, are you involved in any of those?
I am. I'm involved in a couple of those, but that's probably all that I can say about it.
Okay.
Before it premieres on October 19th.
When I reached out to a lot of people when I was doing my research on this, everybody thinks of Robert Stack, because what a great narrator he was, so how's this going to work without somebody like him? I thought the camera work was just phenomenal, because you start out with Jane Green and it just takes you into the story. And the cast themselves, they're basically the narrators, but I think the photography was phenomenal.
Thank you. I do. I really appreciate that. We put a lot of time and planning into try to figure out how to, shoot the show in a familiar yet different way, if that makes any sense. Because of the fact that there is Robert Stack, who passed away years ago, and there wasn't going to be a narrator. And I think other people involved really wanted to try to make sure that, the show felt familiar to the people who knew it, back when it was playing in the 80s, 90s, I think even into the 2000s. But also make it feel updated a little bit and maybe a little more cinematic with new technologies that we have available to us. So I really hope that audience members don't miss the narrator too much, but I think that the directors and the production company, they've done a really good job with telling the stories without really needing a narrator.
I was really surprised, came back on Netflix, and not, like NBC, ABC, CBS.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I can't speak too much to that just because, as I'm not a creator, I'm not a director, but, I do know that Netflix really prides himself on being open to the creative process and to the creators, and I do think that you have probably a little more freedom on a platform like Netflix than you would on your typical kind of broadcast, ABC, CBS kind of station,
Right. When I was doing my research and putting this out to my fellow podcasters that I'm friends with, I have friends in Australia and England sending me their response. So it really hits home when you find out people are watching it that far away. Japan.
Yeah, it's crazy. I had put something up on I think one of my social media accounts when the show had been the number one program on Netflix in the U.S. for 5, 6, 7 days, something like that, and a friend of mine in England took a screenshot and he said it's number one here too, and he sent it to me, and I was like, wow, this is number one. I mean, I can't say across the globe, but it's the amount of people that were tuning in to watch these episodes is really just spectacular.
Another thing too, and I put this out there, on Facebook groups and Twitter and Instagrams. I was looking for people that knew anybody maybe back then that's seen this or was involved in this any way. And I was really surprised. I got responses back from people. This happened on the same night, but wasn't in Berkshire. It was in Connecticut, and one was in New York. And they didn't want to give their name, but they just wanted to share their experience, and how they did. One of them told me they did call it in, and they were told basically, what were you drinking tonight? So, so I think maybe with these people coming forward and sharing their story, maybe more will come forward that maybe we're afraid to speak out all these years.
I hope so too. One thing that's also been interesting is, while we were there actually physically filming the episode, it just so happened that the New York Times put out that article where it said that the Navy pilots had seen this unexplained object, and the video was released. And it's while we were in the middle of shooting this episode, which is kind of crazy timing. And then since then, I think it was July of this year, the New York Times did another article where they talked about the Pentagon saying that, they said they dismantled all these UFO programs, but they were still happening. And there are people who are studying, I think the quote was, either vehicles or objects not from this earth. And, the fact that all these little things kind of keep coming out, I hope that gives the other people that may have experienced something maybe a little more freedom to come out and share their experiences. And I think the more people that you get sharing what happened to them or what they experienced that night or other nights, just provides more information and tries to help us get to the bottom of what this actually is.
I'll be right back with the conclusion after this short message.
Hello, I'm Kayla Knight, the host of Get Grimm, a weekly podcast for the miniature folklorist or teller of tales in your life. Each week, I adventure to adapt several tales around a central theme and share them with my audience, along with my own commentary and background on each story. New episodes are released every Saturday, and I can be found on Apple iTunes or on your favorite podcast app.
In 1994, we had an incident in our county, in Trumbull County, Ohio, with UFOs, and it made the Art Bell show. With that show, and also what happened in the county over from mine in 1966. Matter of fact, that story went on to create Close Encounters of the Third Kind. With all these stories and with yours on the Berkshires, one thing they all had in common was the craft didn't make any noise. What Melanie was telling me, when you're on that craft, there's no sound. And Tom Warner.
It's amazing. Their stories of what they experienced.
These things, and this is, you could look it up on YouTube, UFOs over Trumbull County. And I know a couple of the police officers at that time personally. A light shined down on them, no sound, but they had that knocked out their power, their cruiser, no radio signal. And I just thought it was amazing that there's so many similarities in the Portage County incident, the Trumbull County incident, the Berkshires. Did my research on it, and all of a sudden all these people are contacting me, how your shows affect people around the world.
Yeah, it is. And, I think that kind of harkens back a little bit to one of the reasons that I fell in love with filmmaking, is that it is this storytelling medium that, it touches on almost all your senses. Of course, obviously not smell, but, you get the sound, you get the picture, you get, the use of music and the use of camera angles, and all that comes together to really impact the audience's viewing experience, or their experience of being told the story. And that's why it's my favorite storytelling medium. That's why I chose to go into this. Just the ability to touch people and either inform or offer them experiences that they may never have another way of seeing or being a part of. It really is. It's almost magical.
Well, Justin, I really enjoyed talking to you. What do you have planned for the future?
Well, I have a documentary that I shot that I believe is coming out sometime next year. Other than that, honestly, this whole COVID thing has really kind of put a damper on our industry. There's not a whole lot happening right now. So I've kind of taken this time to develop some projects, both narrative and in the docu world, that I'd like to investigate a little bit more myself, and putting those together and trying to make those happen. So, trying to take the downtime to turn it into a positive and keep everything moving forward.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate that.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Justin. I want to thank Justin Janotwitz for being my guest today. It was my pleasure to have Justin sharing his experience and knowledge and creativity on his process of filmmaking. I really did enjoy his core of filmmaking, which is a 3-part process, really. It's just boils down to simplicity. The story always comes first. It's a team sport. Be sure to come back next week when I will be talking to Marcus Clark, the director of the Berkshire UFOs. And also make sure you go to Apple Podcast, rate, review, and subscribe to Ghosts in the Valley. I'm your host, Al Cooley of Ghosts in the Valley.
Podcast Network.